maybe 5 years ago, Charlotte, myself, and Melissa visited Lisa Viviana at DEM. She's like this lady, and we talked about both those grant sources that you have just tagged, the USDA and the DEM. And I have copies of applications. The applications state, have a question mark, flag your use. And is it agriculture? Is it in farming? Does it have any cows? Does it have horses? Does it have a garden?
Right.
And so my sense is that there's nothing in those that I've seen that says wild area. It always, they are looking for farming land and productive, natural, normal use. I think, but you have to read those forms, and they're online, I believe. I'm not an online person, but you can get them and read them. And government changes its forms very often, but at the moment, as I remember, and I have some copies for them, I can show you. Yeah, great. So use is the key.
Now, would you like to talk about the potential historic value of the property?
Four of us here from the Preservation Society here tonight. I'm Nat Taylor, President of the Barrington Preservation Society. And a core group within the Preservation Society really began to intensively research this lot. I think immediately after it went through the planning board the first time. And I think there are a couple of others here who have done more of the in-depth research than I have, but if I could just briefly summarize it. The whole area, which is the area that Phil was describing, the potential or the proposed zoning change, this whole area was, in early colonial times, it was the first nucleus of colonial settlement in what is now the town of Barrington, of European colonial settlement in the 1660s. All of what is now Barrington was incorporated in the town of Swansea in the Plymouth colony in 1667. But even before that time, possibly a couple of years before, Reverend John Miles, who is an important figure in the history of the Baptist faith on both sides of the Atlantic, began preaching in Rehoboth. He was censured by the town of Rehoboth, and he and his followers built a meeting house over the town line, essentially out of the jurisdiction of Rehoboth, only 100 or so yards. And all the textual sources from the 19th century point to Lot 3A as being a very likely site of this early meeting house. The meeting house was not there for very long. It had already, they had already chosen a new location before the conflict generally known as King Philip's War in 1675-76, and the structure may have burned, it may have been moved, but it's Van Edwards, who's here tonight, who combed through the available textual sources and put together a careful dossier suggesting that this was in fact the location of this meeting house, which would make it important in colonial history. It is highly probable that there was at least perhaps one or two of the earliest European settlers' homes was also on that 6-acre lot. And we put together this material essentially speaking about the potential historic significance back when this issue was being was a dispute, and we entered as a litigant in the town's appeal of the State Housing Appeals Bureau's action on behalf of the developer a few years ago. Both the Preservation Society and the Barrington Conservation Land Trust, we both entered as parties with the slightly different focuses. And now that the town has acquired the parcel, I think we have, as an organization, not deliberated ourselves on what we would recommend as the final disposition of this property in terms of use, although we are very sympathetic to the Nature Conservancy concerns of our sister organization, the Conservation Land Trust. What we are focused on at the moment is, now that this parcel is under town ownership, it provides us an opportunity to continue research through non-invasive archaeological survey means to research the potential historic significance of this particular parcel. The outcome of an archaeological survey might lead us to take a stronger position that it be preserved if in fact there's conclusive evidence that this was the site of this particular meeting house. Reverend Charles Hartman's here tonight. I don't want to step on what he would say to this as the pastor of the successor congregation to John Miles's original congregation back in the 1660s. But one sort of shorthand interpretation of this is that it's one of the very first Baptist congregations in the New World.
Third oldest surviving.
And the oldest surviving, third oldest surviving Baptist congregation in the New World. But this may have a particular distinction in that the meeting house purposefully built beyond the reach of the town of Rehoboth, who didn't like these people, and possibly built on this very site, may be in fact the oldest purpose-built meeting house of Baptists anywhere in the New World. Because the other older Baptist congregations met in their congregants' homes. Now this might seem like a kind of splitting hair semantic thing, but it is the kind of thing that could attract attention on a national level and could involve other organizations who would have an interest in, say, preserving this lot in the wild natural state. I mean, the other thing that is so unique about this parcel from a historical perspective, going back to early colonial times, is that because of the geographic isolation that was a byproduct of changing the state, or then the colony boundaries in the 1700s, this whole part of Barrington was isolated, cut off from the rest of the town. And that's why in 2019, there are no water and sewer utilities here, among other things that Jason has talked about, you know, the indignities of the isolated life there. And so it's given us a gift, the fact that this has not been repeatedly built over, built up. From a historical research and an archaeological research perspective, it's a very inviting type of thing to, you know, it may reward further inquiry. So I did want to speak a little bit further tonight about a proposal for an archaeological survey. But I think I've introduced our position generally at this point.
All right, now let me follow up and then we'll introduce David, because we do have the archaeologist here.
Okay.
When we were putting this together, I actually found physical documentary evidence that, first of all, the Swansea Town meetings of 1668 actually assigned house lots around the meeting house, and if you put it together in what I call the cocktail napkin map, you can divide Nockum Hill into 4 house lots centered around an area very close to the present monument where the meeting house would have been. You also have early 19th century accounts. This is a Baptist historian, Abiel Fisher. They appear to have erected a meeting house not long after they began to hold meetings without the bounds of Rehoboth. This house stood a few rods south of the south line of Rehoboth, on the road leading to the house of the late Mr. Squire Allen. That's the Joseph Allen house that Jason and Christine live in. This about 15 to 20 rods from the main road leading from Warren to Seacombe and Providence. That's Warren Avenue. The site of this first meeting house is about 3 miles from Warren, and enough of that. So those are actually textual evidences that there's something there. And some of the other pieces that I've been transcribing to Swansea Town records, as much as I can read them. It's not a manuscript experience, but Nat is correct in identifying that the Swanseites actually had decided to move the center of town to the end of New Meadow Neck. And actually before the war broke out, we're building a house for John Miles. There's also a record that I've seen to have lost, but I know after the war, the Swansea Town Council meeting, I should say, said, what do we do with the meeting house? Meaning it may not have been destroyed. And they said, let's go to the end of New Meadow Neck with it. So at this point, I think it's a good time to introduce David Leslie as the kind of ground penetrating radar expert and give us some, he's, my glasses on, the letterhead, from AHS in Storrs, Connecticut, and see what sort of work he proposes to do for us.
So Van, could I just preface this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, just to give others a little bit of background on that. So just earlier this year, when the town acquired the parcel, the Preservation Society reached out to the lead archaeologist of the State Preservation Commission, the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission, for a recommendation for a commercial firm, a specialist firm, who could propose an appropriate archaeological survey. Based on the kinds of things we have reasonably concluded that it may have been on this lot, what could we do with this? It was a highly curated recommendation list. Tim Ives, the Rhode Island State Historic Preservation Commission archaeologist, recommended that we speak first and essentially in the only instance with AHS, which is based in Storrs, Connecticut. And so it's one of their archaeologists who is here tonight. But just to further introduce him, so they have prepared a proposal for a two-phase archaeological survey of this lot. And I think that may be what I'd be happy to have you just introduce the proposal now.
Yeah, so as Nat was just saying, we produced a proposal that we think is the best way to test this lot for the archaeological sites that that they were both discussing. There are a number of ways that archaeologists generally test areas. As has sort of been alluded to, sometimes it can be quite invasive, where we dig sort of 2 by 2 foot test pits that go down about 2 to 3 feet. When we do that, it is a really good way to determine what's in the ground, but for a 7-acre parcel, when you're looking for a relatively small meeting house structure, something that is probably 15 by 20 feet or 20 by 20 feet, it's very difficult to pinpoint with any level of accuracy how to find that. So one of the things that our company has been doing for quite some time is trying to use other non-invasive or minimally invasive ways to test a landscape for historic structures or even other historic features. We have suggested here that the best way to do that would be to use metal detectorists to first survey the lot in a systematic way, where we have a couple of metal detectorists who are phenomenal at the work they do. They've worked with Kevin McBride, who is a professor at the University of Connecticut, for many years, documenting Pequot War and King Philip's War battle retreat lines from the early 17th and late 17th century in downtown Wethersfield and Fairfield County, a lot of really overgrown, urban areas. They're finding these battlefields using this metal detector survey and finding actually wigwam structures of Native Americans from that contact period. So it's a really good way to find historic period features. One that also, in a lot like this, where there is the horse farm, you would assume that you'll find lots of shoes and sort of more recent iron artifacts. The metal detectors use a pulse metal detector that allows them to either tune that out or listen to the noise, but still find smaller pieces of iron that were made from an earlier historic period. So hand-wrought nails, those types of artifacts that would be telltale features of a structure, like a meeting house. We would pair this with a ground-penetrating radar survey that is targeted to areas where we have sort of rectangular or even just sort of hot spots of historical period artifacts, to then see if we can see subsurface or underground features that might relate to houses that were on these lots. There could be domestic houses and also the meeting house. So we would expect a meeting house to have a very different archaeological signature than houses that people lived at. Houses that people lived at would have a lot of trash deposits and midden deposits where their ceramics and the food that they're eating are being dumped. Not so at a meeting house. You might have a smattering of 17th century artifacts, belt buckles, And the nails that I mentioned, maybe some ceramics, but not a lot. It's going to be a very different archaeological signature and a shallower signature with the ground penetrating radar too. So these two types of strategies would really help investigate the site in a minimally invasive way, which is important archaeologically because whenever you excavate, you are physically destroying aspects of the site. It's something that we always have in the back of our mind that we want to be as minimal as possible while retrieving as much information as possible about a site to make a recommendation for something such as the National Register of Historic Places, which people have alluded to during this discussion. We think that is the best approach. It could be paired at the end with some pinpointed excavation units to determine more conclusively the structure. But we think that a metal detector survey and a GPR survey could pinpoint a meeting house location with relative certainty. So I can answer any questions if people have questions about that. Yeah.
When is the good time to start?
Well, the best time to start would be before the ground freezes. From a metal detecting survey perspective, the ground is going to freeze from the top down, right? So the metal detectorists are going to be sweeping an area, and if the ground is frozen, it's going to interfere with the resistivity of the noise that is created by using the metal detector. It's not as big of a problem if the ground is frozen for a ground penetrating radar survey, although it does affect the survey as well too. Ground penetrating radar surveys, I would generally say that they have to be done when it's dry, more than when it's frozen. You could do it when it's
dry or when it's not frozen.
Not frozen.
It's best to do
In other
it.
words,
It's best to do it before
bad
winter
weather.
sets in. But this is close to the coast, so it will stay relatively. I mean, we're in a cold snap for a couple of days, but it's going to get warm again. I think we've got another month or so, month and a half, before it's really going to set in and conditions would be difficult because you're so close to the water that it will stay warmer here than it would in the interior.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Sorry, I think that was a terrific, in-depth look at something that we're hoping to do, but I don't want to hijack the larger conversation that has convened us here about sort of long-term use. But let me just conclude also with a word about the funding for this survey. Jim, is this apropos, or did you want to speak to this?
Well, we had talked about this, and it appears to me that we would want to do our due diligence before making a determination as to how we wanted to utilize this property. I think that's fair to say. And Bonnie had shared with me the cost of the metal detecting and the ground penetrating radar survey. I was of the understanding that the ground penetrating radar survey could be a first step to determine if something was there, and then you could, if you found something, you could follow up.
Yeah.
Based on that, Phil and I talked, and it's $3,800 for the ground penetrating radar survey.
If I could just say something real quick though, that's a ground penetrating radar survey that is targeted to a smaller area within a 7-acre parcel.
And that's what when I made a commitment from our environmental capital improvement fund to fund the $3,800 for the ground penetrating radar. I did not recognize at the time that that wasn't the first step.
Right, the first step is actually a slightly larger number.
Yes.
And so we've had a back and forth about this, and the Barrington Preservation Society Board of Trustees met, our regular monthly meeting was last night. And in between the Preservation Society and a couple of individuals who have stepped forward as interested in contributing to this, we already have pledges led by the organization, but also with individuals who are here in the room tonight. And I'm not sure I want to count people, but that the larger figure, which was identified as the first phase of the proposed survey, which is the metal detecting phase at 5362, is, you had suggested 3,800 of town funds line item. And there's a difference there of about $1,600, which has already been met in pledges just in the last 48 hours of discussions here. So that in between the commitment you had said and others, it seems that there's already a groundswell of enthusiasm or interest in a public-private partnership for this due diligence to cover at least the first phase of the proposal on the table. So I just wanted to share that.
Can I make a comment? A good 20 years ago, I was down in Portsmouth with the team from Brown University, more than 20, and I'm losing my mind on years, at the Mott Farmhouse. And I was present when they came out of the earth with pot shards. They came out with a piece of a clay pipe. This was 10, 15 feet from the exterior north wall of the house, which was begun in 1641. It's been demolished and taken apart, but it was extremely exciting. They brought out little bits of china. They brought out a pipe stem, and they brought out a couple of tools, because people had lived in a sod house while they were waiting to get the rest of the first step. I'm not an archaeologist, but I get carried away with this, so I'm dying to have this happen.
I think that's good testimony. It's a potentially exciting thing to do with the property.
Yeah.
But it is, of course, a very short-term thing. It's fact-finding.
Sites that are reserves in acknowledging the historic site being there, like, is there an example site? Like, how would that work?
Well, I haven't cast it out for examples, and one question already from the table is, is there any source of funding that could be used to offset opportunity costs to set aside parcels once they've been identified as the site of something historically significant? And I'm sorry, I don't have a ready answer to that. These are very fresh developments in the last few days. I'm certain that our due diligence would encompass searching for analogous parcels and certainly analogous sources of funding. In different kinds of landmark registration options, don't generally involve, somebody saying, congratulations, thank you for preserving this, here's a lot of money. But that's something that we are prepared to look around.
I think the first step is to determine if or what may be there, and this would do that. I'm interested, I could get 3 council members here, and I'm curious as to if any of them have any comments in support or questions.
My thinking is we don't need to rush it, right? I saw the reaction of people voting to acquire this, and I don't think that their primary goal in doing it was finding a way to get as much money back as possible. I mean, it's commendable. We should try to find ways to get money back. But more important, I think, to the voters, and certainly to me, was the subject that we're here talking about, what could be there from 350 years ago, or what endangered species live there. Let's not get focused on USDA giving us back $400,000. That's my own opinion.
Sure.
I echo Steve's sentiments. I think that kind of certainly having the land now, so now the development cycle is important, I think, to certainly people in this room, to the town as a whole. That's why they voted, to support it. I don't think there is necessarily a rush to find what's there, although I think it's intriguing. So I think the town spent a good chunk of money on it, and asking the town to spend more on it, I think, is a bit cautionary. So I think, kind of seeing how it plays out and looking maybe to more grants that can be used to satisfy a broader appeal of keeping it open space, kind of rather than a farmland use, might make sense.
I think I'm kind of right there with them both, and a little between both agreeing completely that there's no rush, really in either side. Whatever was there hundreds of years ago is still going to be there when we go look for it, as long as we don't move and disrupt it or cause any harm to it, which doesn't sound like, and anybody has interest in disrupting significantly what's there. And I also, I was happy when I heard 56. I thought it was going to be 56,000. That would have been concerning. I think it's continuing to explore what we can and want to do as a town. I think these are all the right discussions.
Anybody else?
Well, as I was envisioning this, I asked myself, what if we really do discover something? And I say, that doesn't really put a shelter over it or something. It doesn't really prevent anything else from happening. It might be nice to spend a little bit of money landscaping, say this is where it really happened or something, but not freezing the property. And also probably looking for further uses that do encourage, natural conservation. Say, well, it just so happened, there used to be 350 years ago, there used to be a Baptist meeting house. There we go, now. So I see it as not an exclusionary conclusion, it's just a little footnote.
Bonnie had mentioned to me that the Baptist Church nationally would be, if we did find some evidence that the meeting house was there, that there might be some funding available from them in historical preservation efforts.
No.
Charlie got volunteers, and she said.
The American Baptist Historical Society is hard pressed as many church organizations. They might give some support and encouragement to it, but as a source of funding, I don't think that would be.
So the Baptist Church official position is a potato farm would be just fine?
If you knew Baptist, you'd know that there's no official position.
Yeah, and so I think the first step is to let's figure out see if we can figure out what's there before we move forward. And as everyone has said, there's no rush to do this. If we have funding available to initiate the metal detecting survey, which we do, then and we have time before the winter, we might as well proceed with that if we get it scheduled, and that way we have the winter to try and determine what our next step is, and we'll have some kind of definitive, not definitive, but some kind of idea of what may be there.
I appreciate that. That sounds like good due diligence from the town, and I just wanted to say that personally, I'm exactly where Joy is on this. If nobody's rushing to put in a potato crop that's going to disturb the soil 4 feet down or something, there is no urgency, but absolutely, if we have the focus of interest now and the goodwill, and if the funding is there, then yeah, I would support going forward with a survey that would give us a little bit more information. The researcher in me naturally supports that.
Melissa?
Of course, she's here. I didn't see her.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Melissa Warren. I'm currently the president of the Barrington Land Conservation Trust. The Barrington Land Conservation Trust has been involved in trying to prevent the development of this property from almost the minute the original development plans were filed. Charlotte Stormberger was there saying, no, this is absolutely the wrong use of this property. And despite her very compelling statements, well, the planning board was convinced, but Shab, unfortunately, was not. And so the land trust is absolutely thrilled that the town has purchased this property and kept it from being developed. We have here tonight 1, 2, 3 current board members and several former board members and lots of other people that I recognize as having been involved one way or the other, including as interveners in the proceeding before SHAP in an effort to try to keep this property from being developed. So there is tremendous amounts of interest, both before the town purchased it and now, in keeping the property undeveloped. The question is, what does undeveloped mean? To the land trust, I think undeveloped means a use that will not impact the current condition of the Rainer Wildlife Refuge. Rainer Wildlife Refuge is a wonderful open space that's used for a number of purposes, mostly passive recreation, although I think probably the terrapin who nest there probably don't consider their activities to be passive. In their lives, that's a very active activity. And that really is the highlight of the Rainer Refuge. There has been, over the course of the years, tremendous efforts to help perpetuate the lives of the population of that endangered species there at Nockum Hill. And again, Charlotte has been instrumental in it. Amy O'Donnell here has been instrumental in continuing that work. And so, the Land Trust's ultimate goal here is to make sure that this property is a complement to the Rainer Refuge and not something, and doesn't have a use that is in some way a detraction from the refuge and the benefit that it provides to all kinds of different species, including the ones who walk around this town on two legs. So that's our position. Thank you.
Would anyone else, does anyone else have any comments? Shao?
Yeah, I would. Thinking about this for a long time, this is a possible way to handle it. Since this is prime farmland, my thought has been to take the 6 acres and take the southerly or southwesterly 4 acres and let that be leased to Town Farm. And is an addition to their farming. And then the northerly couple of acres be set aside as a dedication to the preservation value of it. Around the pond, perhaps to have a walk around the pond, and I think Bonnie suggested sort of a granite place to sit down. Though I respect Amy's interest in having it be just plain open space, in order for it to be open space, it is right now, it is just full of Russian olives. And they, no matter what happens, whether it's farming land, open space, or whatever, a bulldozer is going to have to go in and get that out, because nothing can be done with it without getting rid of the Russian olive. And also, it will be nothing but invasive species unless you plant something else. So that's just something to keep in mind. So this is just an idea, and regardless of whether the exact space of the place of the meeting house is found or not, my ancestor way back used to come over from Lakeville, Massachusetts every Sunday and go to that church. And her husband built a special house near it so they could go to that church every Sunday. This is 1675, and she was carried off during the war by the Indians. Anyway, this is, I think it's a reasonable way of doing it, of saying, yes, this is an important preservation site, and even if we never find it, it's still an important preservation site. That meeting house was somewhere on this property, And so this is a place where, whether there would be some kind of plaque or something or other, giving people the history of it. And anyway, it's an idea. But it would be, we would be getting some income from it, from leasing it to a Foretown farm or something like that. And there have been terrapins nests there, certainly not a big group of them. I've seen one nest there, I think. But that's, so long as it's one way or another left open, that I think that's fine. Anyway, that's my idea.
I'm Catherine Beauchamp, and I've been working with Charlotte for 3 years. And I can understand someone is to remain completely open space, but I also advocate for the farmland, because walking up there every single day throughout the entire spring and summer, going into fall to do the terrapins, watching the farmland change over the seasons, and how much of nature comes to that farmland. It feeds so many birds. It feeds the geese. And the cover crop that was used after the corn was gone and the beans were gone, I took a picture of it, sent it to Charlotte, and I said, "What is this?" And she said, "It's buckwheat." The field had hundreds of monarch butterflies. Everywhere you looked were monarch butterflies. And there's a lot of milkweed out there. And also a beekeeper has put 4 of his hives in the field that's up at the top, way in the corner. And he was standing out in the fields with me, and he said, "I'm just so thrilled. All these bees were in that buckwheat." And they're, all over the place anyway. But I think that the farmland definitely contributes to nature out there, as well as the carnivores are eating. We can see their scat. They're eating all of their fruits and vegetables. Oh, there was lots of, regular melon and watermelon and tomatoes and beans, berries, etc. So, the animals, I think, ate very well this year. They certainly got plenty of the terrapin eggs.
Well, as an aside, I need to tell you right now we're wrestling with bee keeping, because right now, as our ordinances are written, beehives are not allowed in our community, because bees are livestock, if you can believe it, and we do not allow livestock. No.
If this and the other parcels along George Street were to be rezoned with this new category that I was there at the September meeting was continued, would that allow apiculture?
We're writing an ordinance that's going to allow beekeeping throughout town at various levels. No cows, but
No cows.
bees will be allowed.
Well, they certainly did a lot of pollinating, and they're pollinating, not just the fields, but everything, all of the flowers and the grasses, etc., that are growing all out in Nockum Hill.
There are beekeepers here in town.
Yes, I know.
In town itself, so
Yep.
we want to make sure that we support the bees as
Yeah.
best we can.
So
Just a short little history, a little bit that I know. I'm Lauren Clegg, and I ask a million questions all the time about my husband's history, and Chris would know more of this, but way back, the Burnleys, which was my husband's grandmother and grandfather, owned all of Nockum Hill, or most of it, big apple orchards, and so where all the turtles are now was in the Clegg family, and he had no sons, and was like, "I need money," and sold off to a man who then sold it off to the town. So we're so glad the turtles are there, and I'm so glad for Charlotte and Bonnie. I can't thank them enough, because they were the ones that got all this done. I'd like to think we could have done it, but I don't think so. They were awesome.
Anybody else with any comments? Yes, sir.
I'm Jason Lawrence, my wife Christine.
Would you identify yourself as?
Sure. I'm Jason Lawrence. Bonnie, I'm Jason Lawrence. This is my wife Christine. Bonnie's been in our house a ton of times. She's awesome. And I really appreciate this, and I'm looking around this room, and this couldn't have happened without all these people just pushing, fighting for this. And coming into this, because the last time I did this, I had to stand up, I don't know how many times I had to stand up there and nervously try to talk and get what I was saying, so I wrote down stuff. So I'm just going to wing it. So I have two suggestions, and the first one is to do this archaeological survey, because we really have to find out what's there before we turn it over, before we do anything there. Like let's see what's going on. So I fully support that. I want to see what's there. I had an amateur guy do the metal detecting in my yard, and the firefighter was like, "Hey, can I come metal detect?" I think he kept all the gold. But I got like belt buckles and nails and buttons, lots of buttons, stuff like that. So it's pretty cool what came out of the ground, and I can just imagine, because that place, I used to cut the grass. I grew up in that house, the Allen West house, and I used to cut the grass for the horse farm over there. And it was always just a horse farm. It was beautiful at one time. So that's my first suggestion. Let's do that before we make any decisions. And then my second suggestion, one of the people that I met was with Bonnie. She's extraordinary people that I met in this journey over the past 6 or 7 years, helping me get my house on the National Register of Historic Places. Bonnie's awesome. I think everybody knows her here. She's so passionate about protecting the historical integrity of our town. I honestly believe that this property would not have been saved without Bonnie pushing all of us to fight and never quit. Because if you know Bonnie, she pushes. Like she pushes. And we never quit. So I stand here, even though I'm sitting and I'm not standing up there, asking that whatever fate is waiting for Lot 3A, that we rename Lot 3A to honor Bonnie Warren. Whatever happens to this lot in the future, I'd love to see her name on it. And that's my second suggestion. She puts so much time and energy into it, and she inspires me. She's awesome. I'm sure there's a lot of people here that are inspired by her. So I'd love to see that happen. That's all I have.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Newton. I'm a member of the Barrington Preservation Society, and I'd just like to say that, Bonnie Warren and Nat Taylor and Van Edwards have been the stalwarts of moving this thing forward. They're moving on eventually from the Preservation Society. Jason's a member of the Preservation Society. I have the honor of coming in as one of the officers of the Preservation Society, and I just want to say that as an amateur historian, literally everything I have done in terms of researching this town all lead back to this property. And it really is incumbent upon us to know what happened there to the best degree that we can. And the study that has been proposed, I think, is a wonderful starting point. And on behalf of the Preservation Society, I know that the members are really interested, not just in this step, but whatever steps are appropriate after we know a little bit more about what's actually under the ground. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in and say that.
So it sounds to me, and please correct me if anyone disagrees, that we're in violent agreement that our first step would be to do the metal detecting study prior to the frost coming in and the ground freezing, and we'll have some time to get that documentation, get the word out as to what may or may not be found, and probably reconvene at a later date to determine what our next step should be. Any comments or disagreements on that? Okay, then, yeah,
I'm not gonna tell
I
you
want
no.
to congratulate Jeff from the last, since he has become our manager. He has been available, he has listened to us, and he's been helpful. So I want to give a big hand to Jeff. Recognize, we have three groups here. We have the Friends of Nockum Hill, which Jason and all the gang in the back. I don't know, I can't see very well. Are the Brooks here?
Yes,
And we have had, I don't know how many meetings, maybe 30 over the years at Jason's house, and his wife always feeds us. So we come regularly. We get lovely, lovely order, what am I trying to say? Never mind, forget it. I can't think of it. I am leaving Barrington. I hate to tell you this, but this may be my last meeting. I have my 90th birthday this summer, and my kids are moving me to Peacedale in December. That is awfully soon, and I am here because this is my project, and I'm coming back once a week because my grandson drives, and that Kingston Road is his road for his gas station. And I won't be here, so at your next meeting. This project has become my major purpose. And I also, she's not here, but I want to also thank June Speakman. At the time, she was president of our council in 2015, and I was in the middle of Haynes Park with a Fiddle Fest taking, signing in musicians. I lived by Haynes Park in the old Richmond farmhouse. And June said, "Where is the Preservation Society?" And I said, "Oh, what are you talking about?" She was running around with David Cicilline getting signatures. I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "They're going to build low-income, middle-income housing in Nockum Hill." I said, "You're kidding." I didn't believe her because we had missed all the planning board meetings. So I went up to Nockum Hill, and I just have to share this. I've told a lot of people this. I got in my walker. I went up to Nockum Hill. It was late August, and the sunsets were gorgeous. There was nobody there, and I sat by the stone monument. I had never read the monument, and I've lived here 53 years. Believe me, it was time I read the monument, and all of you need to do it too. And I sat there for over half an hour, not a sound at all, no birds, no animals, no cars, no trucks. And I tried to project myself back into the 17th century, and what it must have been when Miles and his friends, and I'll bet you that the Native Americans showed them this site. It's too good a site not to have been well known to the Native Americans. Very, very rich soil. Path, which is a bridle path, and is now your path through the Doug Rayner Refuge to the beach where they used it for baptisms. I had such an experience in a quiet time that I realized that this was the most unusual historic site in Barrington. And I'm a professional in the preservation world. I worked for the state office for 30 years. I helped start the program at Roger Williams, and I've written a lot of reports and gone to a lot of town councils all over. But this is the one I care about the most. So when you get around to laying out the cemetery, you have to save me a spot so I can have a post. Thank you, Paul. I really care about this project, and I could go on, but I've said enough. Thank you very much, everybody who cares.
Thank you, Bonnie. So, just one advertisement. If you haven't gotten the Barrington Times or gone on the town website, the town council has established the Barrington Heritage Hall of Fame. And we will have our introductory class this spring. The applications are due on December 31st. Anybody can put in an application for someone. And I'm looking for volunteers to sit on a 10-member selection board to meet just twice and make the initial selections, and then we'll have the appropriate recognition. So if you're interested, go on the town website. You can call my office if you'd like to sit on that selection board. I'd be happy to entertain that. We've got some names already. And hopefully this will be something that will recognize the people of our community that have contributed to it for so many years. So, for what it's worth, does anyone have anything else?
I just had because we have all the right people in the room to ask, it occurs to me that maybe one thing we can do, so all of the town's publicly owned land is categorized in an ordinance that says what it is. So we have, open space for athletic fields. That's, the ordinance would say that. Conservation parcels are designated conservation. Would it make sense to designate this as conservation land by ordinance? It's not something that can't be undone, but to undo it takes 2 months of public hearing and things like that. And it occurs to me, rather than, leaving it to chance, that ties it up enough that everyone knows nothing will happen to it until there's a public hearing, notice of an ordinance change. Does anyone have a problem with that?
The only issue, Gilbert, if nothing were found and we decided we wanted to apply for USDA money, we have to reverse that.
Yep. Yeah, that's my thinking. It's reversible, but at least there's enough hurdles in the way of reversing it that everyone will know about it. There's a public hearing, a big discussion, so that nothing happens to the property without all that.
December 2nd is the next conference, so we'll plan on that.
I think when we reconvene with the information we'll have from the survey, to look at a few funding options. If there is funding option to leave it just as it is, kind of maybe more of the criteria for what the USDA or the DEM funding, what that would mean and how that would work. And then if there's anything else we could explore, because I think at that point, we'll probably be looking to see what's going to be the use of the land after. I think that'd be.
If no one has anything else, thank you very much for your time. We will report back and gather again to discuss our options. Thank you so much.